morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of voice of radio, so today we need to take a look at Twilight Masquerade, because here's the deal, right? EUIC is happening this weekend, and it's a tournament where Temporal Forces becomes legal. And Temporal Forces is a very, very, very big deal. It is a set which is introducing Ace-Specs back into the game after they were here in Gen 5. It is a set which is bringing us big new future Pokemon like Miraidon and ancient Pokemon like the single prize Roaring Moon. It is a great set which has made a big impact on the meta. And a couple of weeks ago, I was looking at Twilight Masquerade, the upcoming set, the next set, and I was going, well, I'm not sure Twilight Masquerade is on the same level. I'm not sure Twilight Masquerade is going to have such a big impact, and I'm not sure it's going to be such a big deal. And this is an important thing, because in the same way that Temporal Forces becomes legal for the first time day one of EUIC, Twilight Masquerade becomes legal for the first time day one of NAIC, the North American International Championships. So it is a very big deal. The more impactful, the bigger Twilight Masquerade is, the more fun North American Internationals is going to be. And to put simply, there were some interesting cards before, but oh my word, it's being ramped up. So, if we remember, there's two sets that are making up Twilight Masquerade, two Japanese sets. And for instance, we've got ourselves Crimson Haze. Crimson Haze, good set. Not an amazing set in terms of playability, but there are a couple of cards in there which I think are going to make a pretty big difference. Like Unfair Stamp. Unfair Stamp is a huge deal in terms of competitive Pokemon, because it's an Ace-Spec card that can change an awful lot of stuff. You can only use it if your opponent took a KO on the previous turn, but then both players shovel a hand into their deck and you get 5 cards and your opponent gets 2. So basically, your opponent can take an early KO, and then all of a sudden you just drop this. Your opponent goes down to 2 cards in hand. They've probably got a very large deck because they're only taking 1 prize or only a turn or 2 in, and that means that the chances of drawing out of something like an Unfair Stamp become much, much smaller. And of course, this is going to change decks. It makes aggressive decks a bit less viable, because any aggressive deck can be punished with a turn 1 Unfair Stamp. That is a big thing. But then that makes setup decks more viable, because their biggest issue is, what if an aggro deck comes around and beats me before I've gotten going? But now you've got a really, really good option against these aggro decks. And just to be clear, there's no question of, maybe they won't draw Unfair Stamp. No, mate, they're drawing Unfair Stamp. You've got Arven that is played a lot at the moment. Arven will go and grab the Unfair Stamp. What if you don't draw the Arven? Well, if you're really worried, you can play Luminion, which is absolutely still in the format right now, and Luminion will go and get the Arven, which will go and get Unfair Stamp. There's no will they draw Unfair Stamp, right? If it's a deck that is worried enough to play Unfair Stamp, I'm telling you they're going to get it rolling nice and quickly. This is going to change deck construction, because now all of a sudden the aggro decks have got to be worried. Elsewhere in Crimson Haze, it was a little bit barren. I mean, one of the biggest cards as far as I'm concerned is Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX, which of course is a great card because it reduces its attack cost by 1 for every prize card your opponent has taken, and then by the time your opponent's taken 5 prizes, you're doing 240 for no energy. By the time they've taken 4 prizes, you're doing 240 for 1 energy. This is pretty good. And then you've maybe got Greninja. Greninja's got single energy, 170 search your deck for any card, which is immense. But then it's also a stage 2, which is a little bit awkward. Decent set, but really we're looking at Reset Stamp making a big difference. Bloodmoon Ursaluna being a really good tech. Oh yeah, and while we're here, we should probably mention Iron Thorns, which is going to make future decks a lot better, because it's got an ability that turns off abilities of non-future Pokemon while it's in the active. If that's active, non-future Pokemon have no abilities. Okay, non-future Pokemon that have a rule box. If they don't have a rule box, they are actually still safe. So there are some cards that are going to be impactful, don't get me wrong. The biggest of which is absolutely going to be Unfair Stamp, I believe. But I was a little bit worried that the other half of the set, by the other half of the set I am of course referring to Mask of Change, might not be as impactful, might not end up being so good. And here's the thing, there were reasons. There were reasons to believe it wasn't going to be quite so good. And one of the reasons is it is a set which is very much built around Ogerpon. And the problem with building the set around Ogerpon is if Ogerpon isn't actually very good, then the set as a whole is going to have a lot less of an impact. And Ogerpon seem fine, but do Ogerpon seem good? I'm not 100% convinced. Look, you've got the grass one, the teal mass, that lets you attach extra energy and draw a card, which is nice. And of course, let's not forget that we do have Ogre's Mask that lets you switch between them quite nicely, which is good. And then, you've got your Half-Flame Mask, which can do 280 to an evolution Pokemon or 20 for each damage counter on it. Wellspring Mask can do 100 to the active, 120 to the bench. And Cornerstone Mask, which prevents all damage done to this Pokemon by Pokemon that have an ability. There are some options here. But I was looking at Mask of Change as a set and going like, well, it really depends how good Ogerpon is. If Ogerpon ends up being really good, we're good. But if it doesn't end up being really good, that's a little bit of a problem. And then they started revealing a couple other cards from the set. And now I am convinced. Palafin looks absolutely ridiculous. And I don't think the other day I made enough of a big deal about the fact that Palafin looks ridiculous. I told you it was a good card. I told you it was coming in a lovely EX box. Worth pointing out, because I haven't actually made this super clear yet, I don't think. So let me make it super clear now. Alternate art. Which means the regular version is going to be in the set normally, with the full art and a special illustration rare, if one exists, we don't know yet. And then the EX box, which comes out after NAIC, is a bit less important, because you've still got the regular version in the set. If we didn't have the regular version in the set, that means you'd only be able to use the full art. That would make the price of the full art go a bit silly, and that would be, frankly, not ideal. So, Palafin EX then. How good does Palafin look? The answer is full-on nuts broken. Because you've got an ability that says it can only be put into play using Palafin's ability. Well, we've seen Palafin's ability, and Palafin's ability is, when it moves from the active to the bench, you can search your deck for a Palafin EX and switch it with this Pokemon, and then any turns in play, special conditions, damage, etc. remain on there. But then you get Palafin EX out, and Palafin EX has 340 HP, which is the highest HP we have ever seen on any Pokemon naturally. It's ridiculous. It does 250 damage for a single energy. This is stage 2. It's not a stage 2, let's be clear. It's a stage 1. But 340 HP, 250 for a single energy, that is stage 2 territory. Those are the kind of numbers we would expect to see on a stage 2 Pokemon, on a stage 1. And what are they asking from us? Oh, you've got to get a Pokemon in and out the active. Remember Comfey? Remember how for a lot of last season, and even into this new season, we see that Comfey has been, these Lost Zone decks have been amazing. And they rely on flicking Comfey in and out the active constantly. And that's worked nicely. And now you're telling me that if I can flick a Pokemon in and out of the active, and then presumably back into attack, now all of a sudden I've got a 340 HP Pokemon that hits 250 for a single energy. There is a chance, and we're too early, right? These cards aren't out in Japan. We haven't even seen the full set. We need to see the full set and then see results coming from Japan before we can really start to judge the relative strength of these cards, all right? But this looks ridiculous. I did not make, I don't think, a good enough point the other day of quite how ridiculous this card is. It's a stage 1 with stage 2 stats, if you switch a little bit. which seems absolutely fair. And then, of course, just a day or two ago, we saw the new Sunflora. Does 60 damage for each energy, fire energy, attached to all of your opponent's Pokemon. And this seems built in to be a Charizard counter. If they've got free energy on, you get a one-hit KO. And that's free energy on any of their Pokemon. It doesn't necessarily have to be the active that's got the energy. It can be anywhere. And my point basically is that if you start adding all of these together, we are starting to look at Twilight Masquerade as a set which could be pretty good. We've got a very impactful ace spec in Unfair Stamp that really could make aggressive decks a lot worse and set up decks a lot better. We've got Ursaluna, which is a very, very good tech. We've got Iron Thorns, which is a great card in your future decks, which are already strong, let's be clear, pre-Twilight Masquerade. You've got Palafin that looks full-on broken. Sunflora, which is a really good tech against Charizard, which is the unquestioned most played deck. And we saw this at EUIC this weekend, it's not even close. And then we've also got things like the Ogerpon, which could end up not being good, or could end up being really, really good. And when you add all that together, I was literally sitting here, kind of when Crimson Haze was out, and we'd only seen a couple cards from Mask of Change, I was really not feeling great about this set. I was not thinking that Twilight Masquerade was going to end up being a really impactful set. And I want it to be an impactful set, because the better this set is, the more fun NAIC becomes. And now I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, we had a decent couple of shouts in Crimson Haze. Now we've seen a bunch of new stuff. And one of my biggest issues was, if we didn't see the Ogerpon being good, Mask of Change maybe wasn't contributing that much. And honestly, Palafin alone has made me go, okay, maybe calm down, Wassy, yeah? This looks fun. Right, here we go. That's what you need to know. That's why I think we are about to start looking at Twilight Masquerade as a very good set. And hopefully when NAIC comes around, we're going to go, yeah, that was good. But I want to know what you think. Do you think Twilight Masquerade is going to be a big, impactful set? Do you think it's going to be a big deal? Or do you think it's not going to stand up to Temporal forces? Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy. That's where we talk about Pokemon and a whole bunch of other card games. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts, and all kinds of fun things. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.